Hello, my name is George Berry. On the internet, people know me as the Woodguy. I have been a self-employed woodworker for 44 years, and I've always wanted to have a woodworking school. But every time I sit down and add up what it would cost me to have a woodworking school for 30 students, you get to $750,000 pretty quick. So I have decided I'm just going to open up the school over the internet and sort of a YouTube U, and try and post different lectures, different subjects every week so that everybody could come back once a week and get new 15 minutes of instruction. My website now is woodguy.com. W-O-O-D-G-U-Y, Woodguy, one word. And you'll be able to see all the posts on Woodguy first, but every Monday on YouTube we'll have a new 15-minute segment dealing with some aspect of woodworking. And I know that people don't want to start at the beginning. They want to jump right to the middle and start going, but I feel like I really should go back and start from the very beginning of woodworking. You know, in woodworking, most people you'll see, they say that you become the tool. After you work with a tool for so many years, you actually become the tool, or the Oriental idea that your spirit joins the tool and you become one. But I found that it doesn't really work that way. First, you have to become the wood. So the first couple of years in woodworking are usually spent with different kinds of wood and the grain patterns and how the tree grows and the difference in hard and soft woods, and you're becoming the wood. And after you become the wood, then you become the tool. So you become the wood first, then you become the tool, and after you've become the tool, you become the work, you become the furniture, you become the things you're making. Your spirit's not in the tool and not in the wood, your spirit's in the furniture. So we got to go with the wood first. And I know that a lot of these intermediate people and more advanced students will probably tune all of this out. But I've been around woodworking and furniture design and manufacture long enough to know there are people who've been in the trade for 20 years and don't know basic things about wood. I once had a client who managed a furniture company. He actually owned the company. He owned and operated a furniture manufacturing company in North Carolina. And this guy wanted lessons in woodworking after he retired, because he didn't even know that wood expanded and contracted with changes in humidity. I know architects in Atlanta have been architects for 25 years and don't know the difference in hardwood and softwood. So everybody who thinks they know it all, bear with me, because I'm going to cover it all. And we'll start with the basic wood. Wood grows on trees. And every year, the tree puts on a new annual ring. Now, if you look at wood, if you look at a cross-section of a board, or the cross-section of a tree, let's say this tree, for example, well, you see there are dark circles and there are light-colored circles. Now, these are the annual rings, but the light-colored circles are the spring wood. The dark colored circle is the summer wood. During the fall and the winter, the tree doesn't grow at all. So although they are called annual rings, they only represent 2 seasons. Spring, which is usually a light colored band. The tree starts growing real fast. After the winter, the leaves come on the tree. 2 weeks the leaves are on the tree and the tree is growing again. and it puts on a lot of wood really fast. That's the light color wood. During the summer, it slows down a little bit and starts adding the summer wood or the dark colored wood, which is usually stronger, takes longer to put on. So that's the difference in these annual rings. Now these annual rings actually are the grain pattern in the board. So that's one of the first things you need to understand about wood is the annual rings. The next thing, next basic thing is the difference in hardwood and softwood. The only difference in hardwood and softwood is whether the wood comes from a tree that has needles on it or a tree that has leaves on it. If it comes from a tree that has leaves, it is a hardwood by definition. Doesn't have anything to do with the density of the wood. Leaves, hardwood. Needles, softwood. So there are some really paradoxes in this, in that heart pine can be a very strong, dense wood. Sometimes it's so strong you can't ding it with a hammer. And it is by definition a softwood. A wood like balsa wood, for example, that you make model airplanes out of. Anybody who's been into hobby shop can buy balsa wood. You can practically stick your fingernail right through it. But because it comes from a tree that has leaves on it, it is by definition a hardwood. So that's one of the main things you have to understand. Hardwood just means it comes from a tree with leaves. Softwood just means it comes from a tree with needles. Another thing you need to remember in the very beginning, or when you're starting out woodworking, is that wood has a moisture content. Wood expands and contracts with changes in humidity. So that when you cut a tree down, it's all full of sap and water. And it's heavy because water is heavy. The hole in the water that a battleship makes is equal to the weight of the battleship, or it wouldn't float. So all the heaviness, when a tree falls over in a house, that's all water weight. You lose a lot of that weight when a tree dries out. When you have a board that you've sliced out of a log and it is dried, say, for 6 months, its moisture content might be 15% or 20%. And that means that the weight, when you hold in the board, the weight of the water is 15% of the weight of the whole log, of the weight of the whole board. Moisture content is figured by percentage of weight. So it is possible for, let's take balsa wood again, you know, it's light, but when it's first cut down, it's pretty heavy because it's full of water. A balsa wood, when it's first cut down, a board of balsa wood might have a moisture content of 300%, because when you dry it out, it's less than a third of its weight. Now, when it dries, it shrinks. So you have to be careful when you're dealing with wood that is too wet, because if you made, say, a tabletop and it was framed out all the way around it and it began to shrink, then it's going to crack the tabletop or warp the tabletop. So moisture content is real important. Most craftsmen, most woodworkers don't actually measure it. They can feel it. They know how heavy a board is supposed to be. And if that board is too heavy or that 2x4 is too heavy, they know it's not the species of the wood, it's more likely the moisture content. So yeah, if you're building furniture for a living room, then you want the moisture content of that lumber to be 7%, 8%. If you're building something, or the wood in an attic or an attic room, that's a lot dryer up there. The moisture content for that could be 6%. If it's in the basement, then the moisture content of that wood would be 9%. Just depends on how humid your basement is. When I was a beginning woodworker, I always thought that you would take the wood that you wanted to use to build a piece of furniture and let it adjust to the room. Put it in the room the furniture is going to be in and let it stay there for 6 or 7 months. And that way it equalizes. And it's not. And once you build the furniture with it, it won't expand and contract. All classical woodworking joinery is designed to hide this expansion and contraction, which woodworkers call movement. It's designed to hide the movement in the wood. The raised panels in a door are actually raised panels not because of the way they look, it's because they are free float in the frame and they can expand and contract without pushing on the frame. Wood expands and contracts. It would be easy if it was homogeneous like steel. Steel will expand and contract with changes in temperature, not humidity, but changes in temperature, but it does so uniformly in all directions. But wood is different. It only expands and contracts perpendicular to the grain and not with the grain. So a board, when it expands and contracts and changes in humidity, only gets a tiny fraction longer, but it gets fatter. And to make it even worse, it expands and contracts differently fat-wise, width-wise, radially or tangent to the grain are different. So if it's from the center of the tree to the outside of the tree, it expands a little less than along the grain, which would be a greater expansion. So if you cut a tree down like this tree and you let this log dry out, it's going to dry out and crack just like this tree did. This slice was made 1 year ago this week, 1 year ago. And it's cracked that much by drying out for 1 year. So you wouldn't want to use green lumber to build furniture out of because it will dry out and crack. Now, Mother Nature's way is for the tree to grow old, to fall over in the forest, to fall down on the forest floor, and because this side, this is the floor of the forest, this side will stay wetter and this side will be drier, so it will dry out and crack, and then next time it rains, the rain will get inside the log, and the process is repeated greater and greater, more cracks, more rain, expansion, contraction, until finally the whole log eventually will just disintegrate and, become dirt or go into the forest floor and be acted on by fungus and bacteria and go back to fertilizer for another tree. I used to think, when I was a young woodworker, that the reason the loggers floated wood logs down the river was because they didn't have roads. But that's not true. They got roads to get there, and they cut the tree down. They could have taken it out on roads, but when you cut a tree down, you want it to lay in water for a while so it won't dry out and crack. You don't want it to crack before you saw it up at the sawmill. So you put it in the river, let it float to the mill pond. It stays in the mill pond until they're ready to cut it. And it makes it easier to dry out for the for the lumber to dry out, because you're replacing the sap of the wood, which is a higher density, thicker material, than with the water of the mill pond. So through osmosis, the water of the pond is going into the log and the sap is coming out of the log, so that when you take the wet log out of the pond and then you saw it up into lumber, that lumber dries out faster because now you're drying out pond water and you're not drying out sap or the fluids inside the tree. I think that ought to be enough